Now, a dying species with an estimated 30,000 wild rhinos left in the world, commemorating World Rhino Day becomes ever more important, especially on Heritage Day. Our focus on rhino poaching took center stage at this year's United Nations General Assembly, and even Kenya and Interpol have joined the fight. As we mark Heritage Day in South Africa, we take a moment to remember the incredible creatures that our country has inherited and that all of our attention is needed in order to keep the species alive. Joining us in studio right here is wildlife film presenter Bonné de Bod. Bonné, welcome back into studio. I'm glad I'm having the opportunity to chat to you. I've always watched you.
Parliament later today.
It's my turn now.
That's true. Good morning, Kendall. It's great to be here, and what a privilege to at last do an interview with you in my time at Newsroom.
Now, very good. Pleasantries aside, good morning. And
good morning.
First up, you just come back from the Kruger National Park and you observed the annual rhino census. Can you give us an idea of what it is that went on and what you observed while you were there?
Well, I can't wait to report back on the census count, which of course a lot of people could be worried that the information could be used to get to our remaining rhino populations in Kruger. But Kendall, we have to realize that this is a count that SANParks does every year to better understand our rhino populations. And although the data is used by the park scientists, it is not released to the public, never.
Okay. All right, so what is the purpose of the census then?
Well, so the count is important because we need to know how healthy the living population is in terms of this awful poaching crisis. That's number one. Number two, it is also used for management purposes. You know, we know there's a large number of rhinos in the park, but what we might not know is that there are meta-populations. That's the smaller populations inside the total population that interact with each other, breed with each other to create a healthy system. And sometimes they do this on their own, but sometimes they need a little help. So we move them around within the park system. It's a closed system, so it needs to be managed. And then, Kendall, let's not forget that our white rhino population comes from a very, very small gene pool. There's that famous sketch of a hunting party at the Umfolozi River in 1894, stumbling on what they thought were extinct rhinos. So, you know, not only is it our responsibility to protect rhinos, but scientifically, we can't let them get back down to that very small genetic pool. And that's why it's important.
So if I were to ask you, from what you observed over the census period, are you worried? Are you concerned? Are you optimistic? Are you cautiously optimistic?
Well, you know, there's so many people doing amazing work. Can and should more be done? Absolutely. We are losing 3 rhinos a day, 1 every 8 hours. To get back to the census, you know, if we look at numbers specifically, 2016's numbers showed us between 6,500 to 7,800 rhinos left in Kruger, which is a 16 to 20% drop from the previous year, from 2015. And that is concerning. And that is worrying, but we must also take the drought into consideration. Now, the results for this census will only be released early next year by the Department of Environmental Affairs. And when I visited Kendall, the team last week, they were still busy counting certain parts of the park. And once they are done, the results will still have to be analyzed and a formula applied, because they only count a percentage of the park. They don't count the whole park.
How does what was counted in terms of this census equate to what's happening on the rest of the continent? Because this, you know, as animals will move where it is that they can. How does what we have equate with what's happening on the rest of the continent?
Well, that's a very, very good question. You know, we need to look at our rhino population and how we can conserve them. You know, if we look at how the census is done. Now, back in 1990s, the late 1990s, Kruger Park did the census by flying a plane over the whole area of the park. But it's a massive area. So you can just imagine the cost and the money that went into that. And very interesting, Kendall, a total count, this is what they used to do, doesn't mean you will count the exact number of rhinos in the park, because it will give you what they call a negative bias. So you will never see all the rhinos in the park and therefore never count all the rhinos in the park. And there are many reasons for that. Let's take, for example, the black rhino. Beautiful, but quite difficult to see because they tend to hide in the bush, and that makes sense because they eat at the tree line. So it's very, very difficult to spot black rhinos from the air. Now, there are also other biases or reasons, but I won't go into all of that dry scientific stuff now. But in the end, Kendall, what they feel is that after a lot of scientific and peer-reviewed research, they feel that it is a far better spend of time and money to count a percentage of the park using a scientific formula, and that it gives also better results.
Really, it's a little controversial though, isn't it, not to have a total count and to be using a sample of it and using whatever algorithm to say, okay, cool, this should be representative of what we have in the park. How do you not think that there might be some value in maybe once every 5 years redoing that flyover of the entire park?
Right. So you're absolutely right. You know, we will never know the exact number of rhinos in the park. And there are a lot of critics out there who question the number of rhinos left in the park as well as the method used. Now, I posed these very difficult questions to the head scientist in Kruger, and he was very confident that they are using the right method, counting between 41 and 50% of the park using the block counting method, and that their numbers are accurate. So that's according to them. But let's wait for the results, because it will be very interesting to compare this census to 2016.
Right, and in closing, we do know of the rhino farmer John Hume, who had planned to have an auction over the weekend, has had an online auction a little earlier in the year.
Right.
Look, there's a lot of controversy around this in terms of, like, you know, the auction of rhino horn and not. What are your thoughts on what John Hume is trying to do?
Very good question, Kendall, and a lot of people ask me this question. So there was an online auction in August, and then one was planned for earlier this week, and this one was cancelled. I actually chatted to Mr. Hume this morning, and it was cancelled because they were scared of interference from anti-traders. And another online auction is now planned for mid-November. Right. So that will be very interesting. Now, with this past online auction, a lot of controversy, a lot of media attention and coverage, and we don't yet have the results. Now, various sources told me that the department granted 7 permits, although that number has not been verified as yet. I spoke to the auction house twice, and I really hope they will make the results public, because that will tell us whether there is demand for rhino horn in South Africa. Also, we can compare the price to the black market price in Asia, which I've experienced firsthand during my undercover filming for my film. So that will be interesting, and I really hope they do make it public. Like you say, it's a controversial issue. On both sides, you have pro-traders thinking that this might save this species from extinction, because we can harvest it sustainable. Unlike elephants, you have to kill an elephant for ivory. Rhinos, you don't have to kill them to harvest the horn. Then you have the anti-traders who say that, no, this will flood the market and it will lead to the extinction of a species. Also, interestingly, there was a massive seizure of rhino horn at OR Tambo recently, and many speculated that this was the direct result of the online auction. And Dr. Edna Molewa, Minister of Environmental Affairs, released a statement a couple of days ago saying that it had nothing to do with the online auction, and in fact the horns that were sold are still in Mr. Hume's possession. So what does that tell us? There were indeed sales of rhino horn. Right. But when I have more info on this aspect, I will, of course, update you right here on Newsroom. No, I definitely appreciate that. Much appreciated you giving us this time. Bonné de Bod, wildlife filmer and presenter, I really appreciate your time. Thank you, Kendall. Thank you very much. There you have it. Bonné de Bod, I have the pleasure of talking to her today. And she's a wildlife film presenter, talking to us about the recent census of rhino in the Kruger National Park. We didn't get to chat too much about the Black Rhino Day, but I'm sure we'll be covering that with her soon enough.